Tonight, the battleground on the high seas. The fight to take down drugs and the smugglers on the run. The hunt thousands of miles away.
This is big.
U.S. Coast Guard crews from New England leading the charge.
Roger, absolutely.
Fighting for a nation in international waters, stopping the tons of drugs before they hit our shores. Tonight, the risk, the danger.
We're trying our damnedest to stop as much as we can coming up.
And the payoff. A Boston 25 News special, Deep Sea Drug War. Here's Boston 25 News anchor Blair Miller.
Good evening. Tonight we report from the middle of the Pacific Ocean on board the U.S. Coast Guard cutter, the Active. Some believe these out here are the true front lines to the war on drugs. We've spent 10 days on this ship and found it's a dramatic war playing out in the high seas, and it's oftentimes involving Coast Guard crews from New England. At any given moment, there's a ship like this one patrolling the vast oceans, chasing down drug smugglers who are eager to get to the United States from Central and South America. Getting here to see this firsthand is no easy task. It's something we've been working on for more than a year.
Our 10-day journey began back in Boston. We flew from Massachusetts into San Jose, Costa Rica. Initially, a tropical rainstorm kept us on the ground. The next day, we boarded a plane to continue flying farther south into Central America. We took off in a pounding rain and a dense fog. An hour later, we touched down in Panama City, Panama. From there, we jumped in this cab, and right now we're on our way to the port of Panama City, and that's where eventually we'll meet up with Coast Guard crews who've been involved in seizing drugs. 3 flights, 2 days, and thousands of miles later, our odyssey in the Pacific now begins.
Each year, the Coast Guard seizes more drugs than all of the law enforcement agencies back in the U.S. on land combined. The operation here, very intense and involves many federal agencies. The focus of this ship, catching those drugs here on the open water before they ever even have a chance to make it into the U.S. Pulling out of Panama City, leaving the Panama Canal. The mission is clear. We leave Central America and head toward the middle of the Pacific Ocean and begin the hunt for drug smugglers connected to the major cartels. The hotspot for drugs a few years ago was the Caribbean Sea, and drug runners went in through Florida. Now they've shifted here to the Pacific. For nearly 24 hours, this Coast Guard ship, which first hit the water in 1966, cuts through the sea at full speed. On board, we first met with the entire crew, hearing where they'll go and what they hope to find while we're with them for the next 10 days.
Next leg will be leg 2.
The Active charted a course that took us out of Panama and into the Gulf of Panama. We worked our way up Central America, staying 100 to 400 miles offshore. We went through the Gulf of Tehuantepec and made our way into southern Mexico. Our journey ended at the port of Huatuco, Mexico.
Scheduled for 1500.
The captain of this ship, Commander Chris German, is eager to find something because the supply is there.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Typically somewhere between 750 and 4,000 keys is what we're looking for.
That's in the ballpark of a couple tons that he expects to find per boat, per bust. The U.S. Coast Guard is able to patrol here in international waters because of agreements between the U.S. and Central American countries. A large part of the mission is classified. The tools on board alone, like this machine gun anchored on the front of the ship, show they mean business, and that one wrong move on the mission could end with someone being killed.
There's definitely risk involved, and we can use warning shots, disabling fire, both from small boats and from helicopters, to disable the engines. And anytime you're putting lead down a barrel, there's some sort of risk.
It's a 24-hour watch, often starting during the day and lasting into the night. Military planes fly above searching, the Active pushing at full steam in the area at all hours. At night, all of the ship's lights go dark on the inside and outside. Only the red lights illuminate to keep the ship's cover from any smugglers who might see the Coast Guard off on the horizon. If they get a possible sighting, they lower the smaller boat to the side, ready to launch if confirmed.
So a lot of what we try to do is all considered to do with timing. So we have somebody that we want to chase that an aircraft has spotted that's a couple hundred miles away. We have to time that so that we can launch our onboard law enforcement teams at the right time.
It's almost a game of who finds who first, but with the consequences much more serious.
Roger, break 3018.
At times, they bring in this armed Coast Guard helicopter to help chase down the smugglers. At stake, all of this. While our cameras were rolling on the Active, they showed us the 1.5 tons of pure cocaine they seized here in the Pacific, a street value of $150 million. Drugs that will never whittle their way down to simple drug deals on the streets of cities and towns across the U.S. A drop in the bucket, Coast Guard crews admit, but a huge dent in the wallets of the drug cartels trying to get their moneymaker into America.
We're trying our damnedest to stop as much as we can coming up.
As we're going to show you here tonight, those detainees are held on board this ship along with all those drugs. That's until we reach the United States, and then everything is taken off this ship.
Tonight, the real danger on the high seas. Shots fired as the Coast Guard finds what it's looking for.
We chase them, and the helicopter shoots the engines out.
We're there as the drama and danger unfold, and we face the smugglers who are on the run. And then, not long after graduating from high schools outside of Boston, they're on the hunt in the middle of the ocean.
You know, to think that this could have gone into the States.
What it's like for these local guardsmen so far from home. Ahead, when deep sea drug war returns. Here again, off the coast of Central America on board the Active, Boston 25's Blair Miller.
On board this ship, there are 75 men and women doing their part to keep the ocean as safe as it can be. So far, they've spent nearly 60 days at sea patrolling for drugs, and their success beyond impressive. You don't have to look too far to see it. We can show you what's on board right now. 2 tons of cocaine found here in the Pacific. And that's why we came out here, to be here day and night as they go after the people who are trying to get drugs into our country. And this is what we found. Riding off into the sunset, the crew of the Coast Guard cutter the Active is on the hunt for drug smugglers. Down below, they gear up, ready for what could be waiting. And the captain warns the crew of what he suspects off in the distance, 150 miles offshore.
This distance looks like it's a possible transfer.
As they get closer, they see the boat is not a threat, a false alarm. But with other calls, the threat is clear and real. With military planes in the air, the crew gets word of a possible target. They drop this smaller boat in the water while the cutter ship is still moving. The armed team on board sets out for the boat in question. This is the view the Coast Guard has as it approaches a semi-submersible boat common with smugglers because of the amount of drugs it can carry. The Coast Guard takes over the boat and what's on board. They uncover nearly 2 tons of cocaine, the purest form of the drug. A major victory for the Active and a serious blow to the cartels. The 4 suspected smugglers, 1 from Colombia, 3 from Ecuador, are pulled on board the Coast Guard ship and held as detainees wearing white Tyvek suits so they stay clean. A few days later, the Active ship teams up with its sister ship, the Alert. The other ship, also having its own success in the Pacific, and brings some of its drugs to the Active to be stored. The payoff of the Coast Guard's work, quickly a morale boost for the crew. Stacks and stacks of cocaine, another 1.5 tons pulled in. Tobias Reed is the captain of the Alert. He grew up in Boston before joining the Coast Guard. He told me some of the drugs they found came from this blue panga. They wouldn't stop as they chased it.
We chase them, and the helicopter shoots the engines out.
And that's exactly what they've done. This video from the Active shows the helicopter firing warning shots. Then more, shooting out the engines.
That's our primary method, is to use the helicopter with the sniper rifle to shoot out the engines.
It isn't hard to see why the smugglers are willing to run and risk it all. The commander's crew pulled out all of this, unloading it later in San Diego. More than 3 tons of cocaine worth an estimated $90 million.
So as much as, you know, we like to talk about the contraband that we're taking out of the water, that doesn't matter. What really matters is the people that we're taking on board. That's what it's really all about, so we can tear down their network.
A network that federal investigators try to find by hoping the suspected smugglers lead them to the big drug cartels, one bust at a time.
Once this ship gets back to the U.S., the legal process begins with the suspects who are on board. Last year, the U.S. Coast Guard detained 585 people accused of trying to smuggle drugs into the U.S. using the open ocean as their route of choice.
Still ahead tonight, the men and women from New England playing a vital role in this mission.
I'm from Winchester, Mass.
Hampton, New Hampshire.
From keeping a close eye on the suspected smugglers to stacking up tons of cocaine. More and more, the impact they're having.
This is big.
And why Coast Guard crews from Boston are being tasked to help. The dangerous reality when we return.
This fight against drugs often involves crews from New England. There are at least 4 ships based in Boston that patrol these waters here in the Pacific and the Caribbean looking for drugs. And these local men and women told me they know the difference they're making. Among the rank and file of those here, picking up the drugs that will never hit the streets of the United States, are Coast Guardsmen from New England. 2 years ago, Sam Burns was in high school in Winchester, Mass. Now he's a world away. Because this is a counter-narcotics operation, there's little to no communication with people back home. No phones, no Facebook, and just 2 computers on board for people to email back home, military email only. The focus here, seizing huge amounts of drugs, which Burns is seeing up close.
Now I've decided to take a different approach to my life. And here I am, Coast Guard.
Here he is, one of the bigger personalities on this ship. Burns is also one of the lowest ranks in the Coast Guard. He does everything from dishes on the ship to loading supplies to helping with the drug enforcement. He helps pull the drugs onto the Coast Guard ship.
It's kind of incredible to see so much money in front of you. Like, you think about it, like each bale is worth however many millions of dollars, and it's crazy, you know, to think that this could have gone into the States, and like how much, where it would have spread.
A big part of the drug enforcement, of course, searching for smugglers on the run, many of them risking it all on a small speed boat, trying to make the trek undetected from Central or South America to Mexico, where the drugs then slip into the U.S. As crews here describe it, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack.
It's hard to just, catch a tiny boat out there in the middle of the ocean with your binoculars.
That's exactly Seaman Sean Ryan's role, who's also far from home in Hampton, New Hampshire. He joined the Coast Guard looking to eventually be a national intelligence officer. Today, he's at the highest point of this ship, at the helm, searching for trouble on the horizon.
I'd say if we came out here and didn't find anything, that would be a huge disappointment.
More than 3,000 miles from Boston, New England ships are routinely involved in the drug patrols here in the Pacific Ocean, in addition to the Caribbean. The drug problem is that serious, and the success by the local ships is almost hard to believe. The Tahoma, based in Maine, is nicknamed the Neverhoma because it's rarely in port and often sent back out to look for drugs. They recently hauled in 60 bales of cocaine, 4,000 pounds of it, worth an estimated $50 million.
The biggest Caribbean bust of the year.
Jordan Wickens, who grew up in Tilton, New Hampshire, helped bring in that haul that they found on this tanker.
When they found it, they knew right away. They're like, this is big.
Lieutenant John Kearney led the operation and says increased activity forced the Coast Guard to step up its drug enforcement. And that means Boston-based ships heading south more often.
The demand is so high and the amount of resources we have are limited. Just because of the number of ships that we have available, we need to draw from every potential resource and every avenue to make this successful.
And the payoff is huge. The drugs confiscated and the suspected smugglers sent to jail. We've been out here on this ship with these crews nonstop, and they've all told me the same thing. The hardest part about doing this is the hours. Many of them work all hours of the day and night with little to no communication with their families. But they also know their role out here is vital.
The war on... Once again, here's Boston 25's Blair Miller on board the Coast Guard cutter The Active in the Pacific Ocean.
We've shown you the difference these Coast Guard crews are making in the war on drugs, but in reality, it's just one part of the bigger mission. Once the crew of the U.S. Coast Guard Active returns to port, they will have spent 60 days at sea. 60 days of being on the hunt for serious drug smugglers who aren't willing to give up very easily. The hunt often goes into the night and the break of dawn.
At the end of the day, the cartels that are running these drugs, they're very dangerous organizations.
And the 75 men and women on board know what's at stake. Lieutenant Commander Jennifer Runyon is second command of this ship. Her role, keeping the crew ready to go at a moment's notice. And when they do jump into action, the payoff goes well beyond the worth of these drugs.
It's a huge morale boost for the crew when we get to have a drug interdiction, when we get to do a search and rescue case, when we do something where they can see that result.
This is how people outside the Coast Guard usually see it. The pictures, the glory, the tons of coke. What they don't see is the everyday life of these Coast Guardsmen who've put their personal lives on hold to be here. We experience what they do, at least for 10 days. This is where we slept, alongside the crews. For them, it's about balance. Hundreds of miles from the coast of Central America, surrounded by nothing more than the open water. The crew tries to sprinkle their usual daily routines with things that seem second nature to most of us. The high-risk situations of chasing people connected to drug cartels are mixed with days of trying to find relief, including this, set up on the flight deck on one of the hottest days while we were there. And if that's not enough, there's a bigger pool, a morale boost of sorts, where this pool is 13,000 feet deep. In the kitchen, Zachary Davis cooks the food on this ship, and he's wildly popular because of it.
After you get the hang of things, it's like a second nature. You can do it while you sleep.
From the weekly pizza night on Saturdays to the comfort food, the meals are surprisingly good. Davis admits he joined the Coast Guard because he didn't set himself up to go to college. His role in the Coast Guard recently helped seize drugs worth more than $766 million.
The craziest thing I've ever seen. There was a lot. And knowing that all that was going to go into the U.S. and we stopped it, it was awesome.
At the bottom of this ship, where temperatures reach 115 degrees, we found Noah Falcon.
I joined the Coast Guard because I wanted to do something more with my life.
Just 11 months ago, he was a mechanic at a Cadillac car dealership in Florida. Now he tunes up this ship, working here in the engine room. During their last bust of cocaine, 2 tons worth, it was his first time seeing it.
I thought it was crazy, like seeing the boat and seeing it actually happen. I didn't even think we were going to catch some, but it was something else.
Many of these young Coast Guardsmen are seeing the results of their work up close, and even for them, it's a little hard to believe. And the fight continues, targeting the unknown and an enemy that's constantly trying to outrun them at every cost and in a new direction. Once this crew returns to port, they'll get a few weeks break at home, but then it's right back out here, spending it for the holidays far from home and close to the action with one goal in mind, and that's keeping America safe and keeping the major drugs off our shores. Reporting from the middle of the Pacific Ocean, embedded with the U.S. Coast Guard, I'm Blair Miller for Boston 25 News. For more exclusive behind-the-scenes access of the deep-sea drug war, log on to boston25.com/Coast Guard.